The war was over, at least on paper. But for countless Japanese families stranded on forgotten Pacific islands, peace didn't feel like peace at all. The skies were quiet now. No more bombers roaring overhead, no more flashes on the horizon. And yet, the silence pressed down heavier than gunfire ever had. On Saipan, in a small hamlet, the end of battle brought a new kind of terror. Rumors had been spreading for months, carried like shadows through the jungle. The enemy shows no mercy. Americans will humiliate you. Capture is shame. Death is better. Leaflets screamed the same warnings. Teachers repeated them. Mothers whispered them at night. Knives were hidden under robes. Daughters were told their honor could only be guarded in death. So when the foreign voices finally echoed through the ruined streets, the women of one village bolted into a collapsed storehouse, clutching their children as if they were shields. Farmers' wives, widows, teenage girls, all waiting for the horror they'd been taught was inevitable. Boots scraped outside. A door creaked. Sunlight cut through the dark. A Marine stood there, rifle loose in his hands, helmet shadowing his eyes. More soldiers fanned out in the square. The women froze, eyes wide, bodies pressed hard against the wall. The soldier spoke once, then again, louder. No one moved. Finally, a Japanese-speaking interpreter stepped forward, his voice flat, almost rehearsed. "You are prisoners. You will not be harmed. Stay together. Food will be given." The words felt impossible. Still, suspicion clung to them like smoke. Slowly, the women shuffled out into the daylight, ragged kimonos hanging off their thin frames, hair tangled from weeks in hiding. Infants whimpered. Older children's hands clenched around their mothers' wrists. They braced for blows, for insults, for the humiliation they were certain would follow. But it didn't. The Marines lowered their rifles. One set a bucket of water on the ground and stepped back. Another cracked open a crate of rations, leaving it in plain sight. The interpreter gestured simply. "This is for you. Take it." No one dared move. Was this a trap? Finally, one mother knelt, scooped water into a battered cup, and drank. Nothing happened. A girl tore a piece of bread, chewed cautiously, still nothing, and then hunger won. Bowls were filled. Broth slid down parched throats. Bread softened between teeth. Children devoured every crumb while their mothers sobbed quietly, tears running into their food. The Americans only watched. They said almost nothing. When night fell, the women were led to a fenced clearing at the town's edge. Blankets were stacked neatly, handed out one by one. Each woman accepted hers with trembling hands, still waiting for the hidden cost, the demand that surely must come. But it never did. The soldiers kept their posts along the edges of the clearing, rifles slung low, eyes scanning the dark beyond. They guarded, yes, but never intruded. Among the women, questions flickered in whispers. A girl, hardly 18, leaned toward her mother. "Why do they stay away? Isn't this what they came for?" Her mother silenced her with a finger to the lips. Yet the thought clung to them all. Every warning had promised humiliation, violence, disgrace. And still, beneath a sky mapped with unfamiliar constellations, the enemy kept a strange distance, as if some invisible line held them back. Sachiko, the village elder, gripped a rosary worn smooth by her grandmother's hands. She prayed quietly, her voice trembling. Maybe it's their God who forbids them. Another woman scoffed, bitterness biting through the fear. Or maybe they're just waiting. But the days unfolded with a rhythm that felt almost surreal. At dawn, food appeared. Buckets of water were replenished. Blankets were taken, washed, and returned. No threats, no hands raised, no boundary crossed. Suspicion didn't vanish, but it began to loosen its grip, replaced by a heavy, uneasy silence. One evening, the silence broke. A Marine walked forward, carrying a sack. He stopped short of the fire, set it down, and retreated without a word. The interpreter stepped forward. Soap, brushes, cloths, for washing. The women gasped. Some pulled back, mistrust flaring again. But finally, one mother, hands trembling, reached out, dipped a brush in water, and scrubbed her child's face. Dirt gave way to pink skin. The boy laughed, sudden and bright, surprised. The sound was so out of place it startled them all. Joy here? The Marines turned away, pretending not to watch, as though privacy were another ration they could offer. That night, Sachiko tore a strip of fabric and with charcoal from the fire scrawled a message. Thoughtful. We expected death. We braced for shame. Instead, they gave us food, water, blankets, and kept their hands from us. Sad. I cannot explain it. The shock is not cruelty, but the absence of it. Thoughtful. In a world drowning in blood, kindness feels like the strangest weapon of all. Captivity's first days were not the abyss of dishonor they had been taught to fear, but something far more unsettling. Mercy. Fragile and disorienting, forcing them to question everything they thought they knew about enemies and survival. At dawn, the march began. The women tied children close with frayed cords, clutched their meager bundles, and lined up under watchful eyes. Guards walked ahead and behind, rifles loose, never aimed. Whispers traveled like wind down the column. It will end there. The officers will demand their price. Mothers steeled themselves. Daughters lowered their gaze. Each step on the dusty path felt like a descent into humiliation. But when the gates finally opened, confusion washed over them. This was no dungeon. Before them stretched rows of wooden huts, canvas tents, a Red Cross station marked with a painted cross. Inside the fences, families were divided, men one way, women and children another. Supplies were handed out, sacks of rice, tins of milk, even fruit. Children stared wide-eyed at bananas, a golden treasure they hadn't seen since before the war. Yet hesitation lingered. Every offering still felt like a trap with a smile painted over it. One mother leaned toward her neighbor, voice low. Wait, they'll take it back when they take us. But the rhythm never changed. Food appeared, and the soldiers withdrew. Soap and brushes were handed over, and again they turned away. Even when escorting the women to the water pump, they stayed at a distance, as though an invisible line separated them. Days blurred into weeks. No hands reached where everyone feared. The weight of their restraint became heavier than any threat. Then, one afternoon, a man in khaki stepped into the enclosure, 2 nurses trailing behind him. Through the interpreter, he spoke plainly. We will examine mothers and children. Those who are ill will be treated. The announcement froze the camp. Medical care? From the enemy? Surely a new kind of trap. But when the officer crouched beside a wheezing child, his hands were steady, his voice soft. He pressed a stethoscope to the girl's chest, murmured instructions, then handed her mother a vial of syrup. The woman bowed low, tears streaking her face, unable to reconcile this quiet mercy with years of warnings. Sachiko, fingers tight around her hidden rosary, whispered, "Our own men told us to die before capture. Yet here, the enemy urges us to live." Dusk brought another shock. A soldier arrived carrying bundles of paper and stubby pencils. The interpreter called out, "You may write letters. The Red Cross will deliver them." Disbelief rippled through the women. Letters? They had imagined their names erased, their voices silenced forever. Slowly, as if reaching into a dream, hands took the paper. Words spilled in shaky lines. "I am alive. Do not despair. We are taken, but unharmed." Some wrote only names, dates, or fragments of prayers. Among them, a young woman named Ko bent over her sheet, tears splashing onto the ink. She wrote to her mother in Nagasaki, "I thought I would die in shame. But they have not harmed us. They feed us. Maybe you will see me again." The soldiers collected the letters, folding each one neatly, slipping them into a canvas bag. Whether they would ever be sent was impossible to know. Yet even the act of writing lifted a stone from the women's chests. That night, under the dim glow of a lantern, whispers drifted across the barracks. Some still clung to suspicion, convinced this was a performance, a calm before a storm they couldn't name. But others, younger, less hardened, let a flicker of hope break through. Ko hugged her knees and murmured, "Maybe they're not what we were told. All my life I have feared men. Tonight I wrote my mother a letter more generous than anything our own soldiers ever gave us." The Americans kept their strange discipline. Guards patrolled the fences, rifles on their shoulders, but they never entered the women's quarters uninvited. When blankets wore thin, new ones appeared. When a child's cough worsened, medicine arrived. Always with the same restraint, the same invisible line the women dreaded, yet the soldiers refused to cross. That very absence became its own presence, pressing on them like a question with no answer. They had been raised on warnings. The enemy is savage, merciless, driven by lust. Yet here they were, unviolated, their dignity intact, their children nourished. Sachiko bent over her rag of cloth once more, scratching words into its fibers with charcoal. The greatest wound is not cruelty, it is respect. We expected dishonor. Instead, they returned to us a voice we thought lost. Perhaps this is what mercy means. Whispers changed shape. No longer, "When will they take us?" but "Why have they not?" And in that stubborn silence, in that line never crossed, the soldiers began to blur, not demons, not faceless monsters, but men. Surprised, tired, weathered, human, thoughtful. That realization unsettled the women more than the brutality they had braced for. By late summer 1945, the news reached the camps, surprised. Japan had surrendered. The word did not bring cheers, only a nervous stillness. Sad. What now? Repatriation or endless confinement? The Americans gave no answers, only routine. Meals at the same hours, medicines delivered, guards pacing the fence with eyes deliberately turned away. Thoughtful. Captivity left no bruises, no scars of violence, only disorientation. At night, the women whispered the truth none had dared voice at first. Surprised. Not once had they been touched. No demands made. No humiliation inflicted. Thoughtful. The absence of cruelty itself became the memory they carried. Then one morning, Ko, the young woman who had written to Nagasaki, was summoned by the Red Cross. Her letter had arrived. The reply trembled in her hands as she read her mother's words. Sad. I thought you gone. Now I know you live. Heaven has answered a prayer I could not even voice. Ko pressed the paper to her chest. Sad. Tears running freely. Around her, other women drew close, daring to hope that their own words had also found their way home. That night, Sachiko called them together. Her voice was low but steady, carved from years of loss. Sad. They told us capture was worse than death. They told us we would be broken, stripped of honor. But listen to me. They never laid a hand on us. They fed us, sheltered us, and gave us back our voices. Her words hung in the warm night air, thoughtful, heavy and fragile, dissolving into the astonishment of survival. By September, the orders came. Surprised. Release. One by one, the women were led to the shoreline and placed onto boats bound for Japan. They boarded barefoot, clutching the meager bundles. Ko leaned toward her younger sister and whispered, I fear going home more than I feared staying here. The voyage passed in near silence, broken only by the smell of salt and the cries of seabirds circling overhead. When their feet touched Japanese soil again, ruin surrounded them. Cities were nothing but ash. Families were torn apart. The nation itself bent beneath surrender. And yet within these women lay a story almost unspeakable. How could they admit that the enemy they had been taught to hate had given them dignity instead of disgrace? Most chose silence. Fear of suspicion, fear of being branded traitors, sealed their lips. But the truth endured, hidden in journals, whispered in confidence to daughters. Ko wrote in hers, "The Americans never touched us." That was the greatest shock. For years I was told they were beasts. Instead, I found men worn thin by war, men who refused to cross the line. That memory will live with me until my death. Decades later, Sachiko told her granddaughter, I prayed with a rosary in my hand, begging to die before dishonor. But when the soldiers came, they gave us blankets and turned their eyes away. That was when I learned mercy can be more terrifying than cruelty, because it forces you to question everything you believed. Historians measure wars in battles, bombs, and bodies, but for those women, history lived in silence. The silence of hands that never reached for them. The silence of lines never crossed. The silence of respect where none was expected. Years later, as Japan rebuilt and children laughed again in bright new streets, some of those women still kept Red Cross letters, or memories of American guards who stood watch without intrusion. For them, the deepest legacy of the war was not the ruin it left behind, but the restraint they never imagined possible. It was not violence that burned most sharply in memory. It was its absence. Of